Shake it up, baby, twist and creme.
This time, we're doing Season 6, Episode 4, Zombie Nightmare. But first, some follow-up. Adam, what do we have?
A major announcement.
Ooh.
Yes, all the people who brought you It's Just a Show have collaborated to create a network of new podcasts, which are coming your way when this episode drops on Halloween.
Yes, we're starting a new podcast network, and we already have some really awesome shows ready to start up. Adam, do you want to tell us about a couple of them?
Yes, so actually, our own omniscient figure who produces this show, producer Chris, is collaborating with me on a project called You're Not Funny, in which Chris is trying to do comedy for the first time via podcast and is asking me, someone who has experience doing stand-up and sketch comedy and such, about it. And we sort of grill each other about it and have a joke off or gag off. They all have inappropriate names at the end of each episode. And there's also another exciting project that I am doing because I've decided to go full McElroy for this. And I'm doing I guess you'd call it a storytelling podcast called And Thereby Hangs a Tale, in which I invite folks I know and folks I have merely met who I know have interesting stories. And I invite them to come and tell it to me over pod. And we dice it up and release it so it sounds real nice. And that's going to come out every month at the end of the month. And then there is another podcast from a friend of all concerned.
Yes, and I'm really hoping he invites me on because it's such a great concept. So, friend of the show, Michael, is starting a new podcast called This Is Your Mixtape, and it's a long-form interview with an interesting person about 5 songs, each one of which was formative at a different stage in one's life. So starting in maybe childhood or preteen years going up to the present. It's a really great idea. And just as a preview for This Is Your Mixtape, our producer, Chris, will be the first guest on the very first episode.
Yeah, you've only imagined what he sounds like long form after just the little comments.
Adam, do you have any guesses about what Chris's favorite songs would be?
Well, I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to say that the most important song was Kokomo. So much so that he picked it 4 more times. However, they all couldn't be winners. So there are a number of podcasts that simply didn't make the cut past the pilot stage that will not be launched. They are Voyageur, a podcast in which myself and Beth sit down and watch the French-Canadian episodes of Star Trek Voyager and try to parse out what it was about. With no working language of French. With no working understanding of French.
The problem there is actually have a working understanding of French.
That also led to the cancellation of its spin-off, which was called Trek It Out, in which we tried to imagine what each respective Star Trek series would be like if you replaced the show's doctor with Dr. Steve Brule from Tim and Eric's Awesome Show. Lastly, Beth had a solo project that, despite a very promising start, we just didn't have the budget for, which was called Pasta al Dente, which was a cooking show loosely inspired by a certain famous canto. But anyway, that is it. That is all that just didn't make it, as far as I know. There could be far worse pilots that Chris just didn't let us hear.
I did try to McElroy it with my spouse, but my spouse is very uninterested.
You had a podcast called Law Bones.
Yes, my spouse is a law-talking guy. And for that reason, there's not a lot he can talk about in public.
Plus, he's always like after work, after hours, just like kicking it with Vonda Rhimes, right?
But I mean, I still have a 3-year-old. I might be able to finagle her into something.
Ooh, that actually could be kind of fun. Don't give your daughter Zoloft is the name of the podcast.
Oh, that's dark, Adam.
Well, it's Halloween. Tales from the Crypt. Boo.
Adam, if I was a eager listener and wanted to find out more about these great shows, where would I go?
That's a good question, Mega Man. People can find out about this show at its website, it's justashow.com. But you can find out about the other shows at megaphonic.fm.
Yes, we have a new overarching site, megaphonic.fm, and you should totally check it out and see what new projects we have in store. This is going to be a big thing. So, Zombie Nightmare. Our movie begins in the vague 1950s, where a baseball-loving family man breaks up an attack on a young woman by two young ruffians. He's stabbed to death in the process, and his young son watches in horror. Fade to present, the young, traumatized boy, Tony Washington, is now a roided-up baseball player who's sweet to his widowed mother and walks through the world with a big grin on his face. But as the movie quickly reminds us once again, no good deed goes unpunished, and after thwarting an armed robbery at his favorite convenience store, Tony is run over by a car full of ne'er-do-well teens. His mother, vowing revenge on juvenile delinquents everywhere, calls in a favor from the young woman her husband tried to save so many years ago, Molly McKemby. Molly has grown up to be a voodoo priestess, and she transforms Tony's corpse into a zombie so he can hunt down his killers. And he's very efficient about it, killing off Peter and Susie, the first two teens, while they're cavorting after hours in a tennis academy. The movie then turns into a police procedural, with the Doogie Howser-like detective Frank Sorrell attempting to solve the mystery of the teens' slayings, but his boss, police chief Tom Churchman, played by a bored and sleepy Adam West, keeps trying to throw him off the scent. Meanwhile, the most psychotic of the teens, the switchblade-toting Jim Batten, is killed by Tony while in the midst of attempting to rape a drive-in waitress. But then things take a strange turn, and Jim Batten's father is the next to get some zombie chiropractic work. And it's from there that Frank figures out that Molly was in the crowd of rubberneckers at every single murder site. He tracks her down to an abandoned garage, where he witnesses the murders of the last two teens, Bob and Amy. Undead Tony seems to lose his lust for life after he smashes Amy's head into a door. By the way, she's played by Wayne's World co-star Tia Carrera. He stumbles into a nearby cemetery with Frank in pursuit. And, "Hey there, Captain, what are you doing here?" It turns out Churchman and Jim's dad were the two teens who attempted to rape Molly and successfully killed Tony's father so many pretend decades ago. Molly had somehow shuffled a couple of additions onto Tony's kill list. Churchman shoots Molly in the chest and is about to do the same to Frank when zombie Tony gets a second wind and drags the corrupt police captain into his grave. Frank, the lone survivor, walks out of the cemetery in a daze.
Back on the Satellite of Love, Mike's confused by the bots who have now become Secret Service agents. They repeatedly tackle him to protect him from notorious terror threats such as Gypsy. In a sketch that screams, "We asked our entirely white writer's room if this seemed dicey and they all said it was okay," Dr. Forrester and TV's Frank have taken up Voodoo. An atypically magnanimous Dr. F sends Mike a voodoo kit, which he and the bots use to do some good. They use voodoo dolls to hug Jimmy Carter and give NPR's Cokie Roberts a scalp massage. And listen in when she has a intense reaction. It's not long before Mike and the bots surrender to the darker urges and use a voodoo doll to make Dr. F pee his pants. In segment 2, Tom Servo drives his little car into Crow. The two make up with a relaxing hot tub visit in segment 3, but that's ruined when Mike rises to the surface with fish in hand. Mike was apparently hot tub snorkeling, which weirds the bots out. Mike is the Robin to Tom Servo's Batman in segment 4, as both human and bot don tight Batman 66-era costumes to act in Crow's Batman play. Crow arrives sans costume, saying he abandoned the script ages ago, but tries to play along by doing a killer Frank Gorshin impression. Mike and Crow bicker over the latter's lack of commitment, while Tom may need to be committed once his bat costume awakens the Batman within, and his voice, and every waking thought to the staccato rhythms of Adam West. In the final segment, TV's Frank has turned Dr. F into his zombie, and it's a work in progress. Fearing they've been too hard on National Treasure Adam West, Servo and Crow write him some letters that try to say something nice about the guy. R.I.P. Last Precinct. Gypsy recites a poem she wrote for Mr. West. Frank does make some headway when we return to Deep 13, and Zombie Forrester is coaxed into pushing the button, ending our long national zombie nightmare. All right, so that was Zombie Nightmare, and I understand this particular episode has a very special place in your heart, Beth.
If you'll recall from last episode, I threw down some I called everyone who didn't like this episode an idiot. In fact, it is my favorite, but of course, all favorites are subjective, I'm going to say why I think it is not just subjectively, from my perspective, the best, but objectively the best. But I should point out that it's surprising that what MST3K episodes are considered like the best is fairly uniform across the board. I was always really shocked that how often Zombie Nightmare did not make the top 10. In fact, I was a little bit insulted. So I think I'm going to go ahead and try to make my case for why this is one of the top episodes.
Okay, I'm curious. I'm all ears.
So, letter A. It is a great movie. Not to say that it is a good, well-made movie, but it is a fun, trashy movie. It's fun to watch. I mean, it has so many fun cliches. It has a zombie. It has teens getting picked off one by one. It has Adam West. It has a police procedural, and it does so many really cliche things all in one. And frankly, like, as bad movies go, there's not a lot of dull spots. It keeps the pace going fairly well, and it does manage to create like some tension and urgency. I was actually really surprised to hear, and it's in the Amazing Colossal episode guide, that they really hated this movie, like a lot. Because it seems to me like this is one of the better ones in terms of like coherence and entertainment value. Number B, it is a great soundtrack. This is an amazing score. I think probably the best in all of the MST3K fandom, but you might suggest that our last movie, Star Crash, had a better score. But it's just so of its time. So we should say, like, the star of this movie, well, star in quotations, John Michael Thor. He was also a heavy metal guy. I don't even know what you call that.
I mean, yes.
Rock star.
Yeah. We can go with that.
So he put together the soundtrack, and it's mostly, he's got like one song on there from his band, but it's mostly just other things from the time that are really well selected and really appropriate for the movie. And he does the incidental music, and it's great. The incidental music is fantastic in this movie. From an MST3K standpoint, I think that they're at their top. The riffing doesn't get any better than this. They are very polished at this point. And because the movie's so strong, instead of having a really weak movie where they just have to build something out of nothing, there's a lot for them to work off of in this movie. There's also some really, I think I'm going to call them power sequences in this movie where the riffing is good, the movie is fun, the music is perfect, and they all work together. The settings are all really great. I love the exterior and interior shots. I just want to find that. I'm guessing it's a YMCA or something like that. That red carpet does it to me every time. I'm like, that looks so fantastic. And the Twist and Creme. Do you think it still exists? I would love to go to the Twist and Creme.
Yeah, I thought that if Twist and Creme was still a thing, we'd all know about it. But like, Twist and Creme is not a recognizable Canadian thing. Although I have confirmed with the Zombie Nightmare commentary that it was a real place at the time.
I'll drop in and say that yes, Twist and Creme still exists.
Oh my god, I'm going to have to do it.
Is there just one?
There's more than one, but there is still a Twist and Creme in that suburb of Montreal.
Oh, sounds like a great place to threaten waitresses.
One of its Google reviews says, I used to go here in the 70s as a kid. There are fewer people here now, it seems, but generally it doesn't seem to have changed much.
Oh, wow.
They've changed their signage if it's the same one.
Oh, they changed their signage.
I am absolutely going to go on a field trip to Montreal and do a Zombie Nightmare tour. I'm going to hit Twist and Creme. I'm going to find that secret YMCA. I'm going to hit Park Harple. It's going to happen.
So that is your presentation. That is your case for Zombie Nightmare A number 1.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I would say, just in summary to my argument, like, this movie just feels like a playground for the Satellite of Love crew to frolic in. And that is the feeling it gives me every time I watch it.
Well, that is a nice feeling. Counterpoint. I don't think it's that good. Zombie Nightmare is an episode that I watched it once, and I would never watch it again, but I would always think back on it quite well, especially because of Adam West and all the Adam West jokes. So it always had this inflated reputation, and it's always in the top 30, which I think is more or less where it belongs. Like, I think it's a very respectable favorite, for one, but I think it's a very respectable, like, It should be in like a top 50, top 30 of MST3K.
That's so generous of you, Adam.
I know, right? And I wonder, it's like, why is that? Why have I never rewatched it? And sitting down to watch it now, I put my finger on it, which is that this episode goes from good to great the minute that the first murders happen. And Adam West is introduced, and the medical examiner who sounds like a duck is introduced. When those elements come into play, I get pretty on board, and the movie really takes off. But that's about 45 minutes. And I would also say that, for me anyway, a favorite episode, or indeed an objective best, would have better sketches than this episode has.
I will admit the sketches are not the strongest.
No. I joked about it a little bit. There's nothing too bad about, like, the Voodoo sketch is not actually that cringy, especially since the ones who dress up in Voodoo are the bad guys who are supposed to be clueless and dumb. But
indeed, but
it's a little...
It's still a lot of ooga booga, bones through the nose kind of crap. Yeah, it's not good.
No, and it's like, I get it. They're playing with cliches. It's like, of course, Dr. Forrester and TV's Frank, who literally live underground and never interact with people of color, unless you count Jerry and Sylvia, the mole people, and I wouldn't. Like, it makes sense for them to be kind of clueless, but it's like, it's weird to be presented with that, sitting down and watching it. It's like, oh yeah, this sketch. There's two other things that I think are worth mentioning here. Because one, I think not only have there been like punchier episodes that you have totally dismissed, but those episodes also have like this kind of like fantastical violence or against women or misogyny, like such as the pawing that Ega makes, or the sleazy doctor having sleazy times in The Brain That Wouldn't Die. But this one has a fairly realistic attempted sexual assault, and this did not register at all, whereas like the fantastical ones really bothered you and took you out of both Ega and The Brain That Wouldn't Die, which I consider to be much better episodes.
And we should say, I think, I haven't seen the unmisted version, but I'm pretty sure it's more brutal. I think they cut the worst of it. But, I mean, part of the thing is it's a complete psychopath who's doing it, and he ends up getting a bat through the stomach. So I guess, they are saying this is bad, and anyone who does this, is bad. So it's, it's emphasizing that, at least. And yes, you do have a damsel in distress running around in her underwear before she gets killed. But it seems to be on the side of women in a strange way. Like, it really is sympathetic to the waitress and all the garbage she has to put up with, and really puts into perspective where what seems like not innocent, but pushy flirtation can get dangerous really quickly. And I thought that was, for a really crappy Z movie, pretty well established. So even though, yes, it's obviously exploitative, but it seemed to at least like, this is bad, and that's why bad things happen to the people who try to do it.
Well, I have a follow-up there to that then, because like our hero in the movie is the one who kind of victim blames the waitress after he finds out that Sean has been killed. Sean Levy's character, sorry, I'm already forgetting the character's name. That finds out that the guy has been impaled. Her would-be attacker is impaled on a bat. And that's our hero. That's the good guy.
Well, this is the thing. Is he our hero? Because he's the one left standing, but he's hardly portrayed sympathetically.
I thought that he was. He's the one who's trying to crack the case. But also, on that note too, with Brain That Wouldn't Die, I mean, dude dies. Dude dies pretty terribly. I don't think that movie's on his side either. As crappily made as it is.
Yeah, weirdly enough, I just found this a little less obviously salacious. Maybe it's because the most obvious example of it with the girl running around in her underwear, she was like the Manos the Hands of Fate people in terms of like how relatively modestly she was dressed. And there's reasons for that we'll go into later. But for some reason, and I can't put my finger on it, just didn't seem quite as... if I can turn a phrase, nakedly exploitative of women as I've seen in other movies for this podcast. And I might be colored by the fact that I just like this movie. I'm willing to admit that.
So I'm just going to give my verdict now. This is definitely a better episode than either EGOT or The Brain That Wouldn't Die.
What?
And the hero is Molly.
Really?
Well, I would say that's true. I would say that Molly is the true hero of the movie. In a weird way, this should be her story, but it's not. It's a white person story.
Yeah, exactly.
Canada. It's a country. We all live in it, and we tend to like it, but it does not make great zombie movies, as it turns out.
I beg to differ.
You would make a case that this is an entertaining movie on its own.
Well, I shouldn't because I haven't seen it on Misty, so that would be a pretty tall claim. But I mean, as it goes, it seems pretty fun to me.
Fair enough. Now, how much fun comes from the sightseeing and sheer Canadian cherry picking of it all?
That's probably a lot of it. So the first indication, really, that this is a Canadian movie comes with something that Mike and the bots actually point out, where they look at the sign that says Park Harple, and they note that that is Canadian English, or more accurately, that's French Canadian English. Park Harpel, which is a hint that this was mostly filmed in the suburbs of Montreal, mostly in Dollard-des-Ormeaux, Pointe-Claire, and Sainte-Anne-de-Bellevue, which is where Park Harpel is and continues to be to this day. Apparently it has a really good farmer's market, it has a climbing wall for the kids, and a sturdy basketball area. It doesn't mention the baseball field, unfortunately.
Oh. I wonder if they ever do zombie walks in Park Harpel.
I mean, what do you have a park for if not for zombie walks?
Yeah. And wouldn't you celebrate the proud history of the sort of mini boom that this movie kind of initiated in like French Canadian horror? Because there's like several movies that were like shot in Montreal. I think the most notorious, even more notorious than this, is the movie Draghoula, which is Draghoula, about a cross-dressing Dracula. Yeah, Space used to air it all the time at like 2 a.m, Newfoundland time. I don't know if you ever saw it.
Nope, never.
I did. It inspired a Rob Zombie song and was otherwise terrible.
There's a whole genre called Canucksploitation, and I have no experience with it, but it sounds like you had some touchstones with it.
Well, sure. There were like lots of cheap movies in the video store that were... Basically, they had great posters and sometimes some name brand recognition of either actors or them being like sequels to things. But they were just made as tax dodge movies because you could get major tax credits for shooting in Toronto or Montreal, what have you, and then make a movie on the most meager of budgets, employing like all like the biggest name Canadian actors who are around, or the most popular or most trustworthy Canadian actors around, for like a pittance, because there's dozens of these movies made all the time. And so there was like a big heyday of Canucksploitation in a bit in the 70s, but particularly in the 80s, and like some good came out of this. Like David Cronenberg has a career because of this. Like there's a reason, even though Cronenberg was interested in the horror genre, the fact that he could play in it and like keep making money with it is all because of Canucksploitation.
Oh, interesting. And I think genuine MST3K favorite, Final Sacrifice, is also probably from that genre too, right? Because it's a Canadian movie made in the 80s.
Yes, it's a weird... I'm trying to picture exactly what genre that would be in, because it's kind of a kiddie, but not really, adventure about like cultists. But it's not really a horror movie.
Eh.
What is that movie?
It's like Stranger Things 1980. Which I guess actually takes place in the 1980s, doesn't it?
It does. Stranger Things 1980 is Stranger Things. but yeah, that's a hard one to classify. But yeah, a lot of genre pictures got made. In fact, like Cronenberg's Scanners inspired not just like 5 or 6 sequels that are just Scanners 2, The New Order, Scanners 3, something else, Scanners 4.
Still scanning.
Still scanning. Yeah, there's a cooking one that's called Pan and Scan. But it even inspired a spin-off called Scanner Cop.
All right.
And there's 2 movies called Scanner Cop.
That calls for me pouring my third shot of bourbon.
Oh, nice.
There we
I
go.
am almost finished my Girls' Night Out strawberry samba bottle.
Nothing like weekday drinking.
Oh my god.
Okay, so 2 pieces of real-time follow-up.
Mhm.
First off, I just got my permanent residency the other day, which is the Canadian equivalent of an American green card. So your faithful producer is now more Canadian than ever before.
Cue more human than human.
So you know that Canada is a land of contrasts.
Got that one right in the interview. Also, I just checked, and apparently there is no longer a baseball field in Park Harpel.
No!
Yep.
I feel like we need to do some like stunt art where we just drop a zombified John Michael Thor statue in the middle of that goddamn park.
Honestly, if Detroit can have a RoboCop statue, why can't Montreal have a John Michael Thor statue? Or just pay John Michael Thor to be one of those living statues? I'm sure he'd do it. I believe the term Canucksploitation was coined by the fellow who ran the website Canucksploitation, which you can find at Canucksploitation.com. And he has notes on Zombie Nightmare and a bunch of other movies that were made. And when I was a kid, when I was like just getting the internet in 1995, this was a great resource for me to read up on these strange movies that I would usually see on cable. And the guy who runs this website, it was the first time I ever encountered the origin story of this movie, which was, of course, that it was written as a blaxploitation movie, not a Canucksploitation movie, which explains the prominence of Voodoo, which you don't encounter so much in Montreal. But, like, yeah, this was, and this is the sad truth of Zombie Nightmare, is that it was written by John Fasano, who co-directed the movie and later would make this incredible heavy metal horror movie called Black Roses, in which a heavy metal band is actually a bunch of roving demons who travel to small towns, play heavy metal, and then turn all the boys who listen to heavy metal into monsters.
Oh, that sounds incredible.
It's the best movie I've ever seen.
Someday we're going to have to make a list of all the best movies you've ever seen.
Let's see. There's Black Roses, which is mostly the best movie I've ever seen because of its cover. It had one of those like extended popped out covers. There'll be a link in the show notes, but it was like textured, and it was like this weird green flame with eyes that somehow had hands that was playing this like giant red guitar. And then if you flipped over the box, there was a kid who was being turned into this weird pumpkin head zombie like creature, and it was the spookiest thing my 6-year-old self ever saw.
Didn't Pinocchio already do that 60 years ago?
Yeah, but not with the power of heavy metal. But that does explain the scene where all the monsters in Black Roses are swallowed by a whale. And so Black Roses also has like a great heavy metal soundtrack that, if anything, might even be like more polished and more heavily sought after than the soundtrack to Zombie Nightmare.
The hell you say?
Yeah, that's no small praise. Like, people love the Zombie Nightmare soundtrack, and with good reason, because the soundtrack totally rules. But yeah, he made that. He also had a hand in John Michael Thor's other big supernatural horror spook 'em up, Rock and Roll Nightmare.
So we unfortunately didn't get to see this together before we recorded, but I did, and this must be utter kismet, but I just found it online and picked a spot at random, and it was the spot where he's fighting what I have to assume is Satan, but he gets some like starfish or something thrown at him, and they're basically just obviously like bean bags, and he's pretending that he's pulling them off of him, and it's wonderful.
The filmmakers unwisely decided to shoot that scene in slow motion, so you see Thor actually like try to act as though the starfish are coming right at him and he's afraid, but then he has to reach out for the starfish, pull them to his chest, and then pull them away as though the starfish Muppets have a life of their own. It is a movie that is full of Muppets. It is about a heavy metal band who is trying to make it in Toronto, and there's a lot of very earnest talk about how going to Toronto will make your dreams come true. But yeah, it's a deeply silly movie that almost is trying to go for a horror comedy vibe at first with all the little puppets, but then in a stunning plot twist that I'm afraid I have to reveal, John Michael Thor is not, in fact, just a heavy musician. No. He's far more. He's a angel creature who I think is called the Intercessor, and it is his destiny to fight Satan in all of his forms. And so he does so in a slow motion puppet battle set to what I think is Thor's best song, and a song that I legitimately love. It's called We Accept the Challenge.
Well, on that note, maybe we should talk about Thor and his involvement with this movie.
Yeah.
We both watched the documentary that is based on John Michael Thor. It's called This Is Thor?
It's called I Am Thor.
Oh, sorry.
But yeah, you know what? I will say this. This is one of those documentaries that should really be a half-hour episode of an anthology series about interesting people.
Right.
All the interesting stuff is really at the beginning of the doc, particularly his relationship with his first wife, Rusty Hamilton, a.k.a. Cherry Bomb, a.k.a. Pantera from this movie, who sings the song at the Canadian nightclub. She was his manager and was also kind of the brains of Thor. So the reason why he had so much success is there was this magazine that was called Cherry, which, of course, she was a model for. But in addition to being the topless model of most issues of Cherry, she was the head writer of Cherry.
She was very, very savvy. She ran the whole thing.
She knew how to make connections with people, knew how to make deals, knew how to solidify things, and had a good sense of musical trends of the 70s and 80s. So when she teamed up with Thor, Thor very much started to rise. And even though Thor is still active and you can still see him tour, and I totally believe this too, Thor does go all out with costumes and stuff in his live shows, no matter how small the venue he plays. So everyone who's seen him have said that John Michael Thor's live show is the best live show you can ever see, and I'm willing to believe that. But it doesn't get bigger and more grandiose than the 80s for Thor. Thor's heyday is the 80s, for sure. And that's when people were throwing money at him to be in music videos. That's where he nearly signed on with the same people who represent Kiss. That's where he was nearly part of a giant musical that was supposed to be about, again, the devil, but also had a role for a bunch of dwarfs and seemed very ill-conceived.
And that so Thor started out as a bodybuilder in the 60s and 70s, and he had one of those Mr. Universe bodies, and he knew Lou Ferrigno and all of those guys, and he was a naked waiter for a while, and that was a whole thing. But agreed.
Hold on, no, let's get into Naked Waiter. Hold on a second. Naked Waiter was this body stage comedy about a naked dude, and John Michael Thor, despite John Michael Thor is a handsome fellow, and he is of course a man who is full of muscles. He is indeed in his muscle bound peak in the 70s and 80s. He now looks more like picture your dad.
Yeah, no,
that's kind of what Thor looks like now. But back in the day, he was big and muscly, and so he was the naked star of this show called The Naked Waiter. But he was fired from The Naked Waiter when a man with a deeply unimpressive, not muscular physique just showed up, and he happened to have a bigger cock.
Well, let's be honest, this was a strip club. That was his gig.
That can still be legitimate theater.
True enough. But he got together with Rusty Hamilton, and she was the one who really got his career going, almost got him a really legendary tour, but there was some kind of fight between something. It makes no sense. He claims he was kidnapped, and that's what threw it all off. He was supposed to be in a musical. He just had so many possibilities of hitting superstardom, and I would say it was just his basic incompetence that stopped him from getting there. But she was the one who got him all those opportunities.
Cherry Bomb, aka Rusty Hamilton, aka Pantera, not the other band. She's really impressive, and Rusty Hamilton is kind of the real deal version of Jennifer Marlowe from WKRP in Cincinnati.
Oh, nice.
Where she is this huge sexy bombshell, and she has what I can only describe as Russ Meyer measurements. Is that a tasteful way to put it?
Yes.
And she used that to her advantage. It's like, of course, yeah, I'll be the nude model for this and anything else that needs that, and you'll pay me. And P.S. I can run this magazine better than you can. And so she does. Like, she is insanely competent and focused.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, watch the first 30 minutes if you're interested of I Am Thor, This is Thor, Je suis Thor. But I mean, as much as we are giving credit to Rusty Hamilton, it's hard to say who had more influence in the creation of this soundtrack.
Thor contributed numerous musical cues that's credited to Thor and his Thorchestra. And there's also the song that plays at the end, like over the end credits, which is just called Dead Things, is something the producer asked him to like whip up the day before. And, you know, Rusty Hamilton's one song is not as good as Thor's contributions.
How dare, that is my favorite song on the soundtrack, is Midnight Man.
What?
Yes.
What?
I like how it's like Elvira is singing a song. It's so Halloween-y. I love it.
There'll be a playlist in the show notes with all of the various songs that, you know, you were able to track down because you went on a fact-finding mission for metalheads everywhere.
I did. So if you go to the YouTube site for It's Just a Show, there will be a playlist ready. The two songs I'm still tracking down are Battalion's Out for the Kill, which I think is the song that's playing while Bobby's weightlifting, and The Thing's Dead Things, and I don't know where that comes from. But we will find it.
Before we move on, one last thought about Thor. He's not supposed to be in this movie.
What?
Yeah, much like Zombie Nightmare is not supposed to be a Canadian movie. It is originally supposed to have an all-black cast. And sadly, they discovered that you were going to get better distribution with an all-white cast. And that's why it is the way it is. That depressing note aside, why is Thor in this movie? He's not even the original zombie. And you may recall that the zombie changes appearance a couple of times randomly as if played by a different actor, because he was. The original guy that they hired was just a local weightlifter, and he was a big enough dude, and the reason they had to fire him was not because of his bad acting, was not because he was a not-so-scary zombie boy, but in fact because he overate for their catering budget. And so writer, co-director John Fasano was complaining about making the movie and the woes in having to recast the zombie because, of course, they didn't have enough money to get new makeup appliances. So whoever had to be the zombie also had to wear this guy's makeup appliances. So the person wearing the ill-fitting old zombie mask was Thor when John Fasano complained to him and said, "Where am I going to find a giant Canadian guy?" Thor responded, "I'm Canadian," and so movie magic was made.
You know what? He does a pretty good job. Good job, Thor.
Hey everybody, it's time for the Shadow 13.
It is that time of year. Yes, it is the spooky time of Halloween. But it's also time to list 13 fun facts about both Zombie Nightmare and this episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000. The clock is ticking. It's almost time. Go, Beth! Go!
Zombie Nightmare was made with a budget of $180,000, $25,000 of which went straight to Adam West.
Obviously, Adam West as the original Batman gets top billing, but Tia Carrere had yet to have her big break with Wayne's World. Her second billing in this movie is likely due to her 2-year run on the legendary daytime soap General Hospital, starting in 1985, where she played Jade Sung Chung. She was part of the show's Asian Quarter storyline, involving a Maltese falcon-like search for some missing black pearls stolen from the eyes of a couple of Buddha statues owned by the Ancient One.
After acting for a few more years, lead teen baddie Sean Levy, Jim Batten in the movie, eventually moved into producing, having a hand in shows like Stranger Things and The Night at the Museum series. One of Levy's most recent on-screen appearances was on 30 Rock as Scotty Shofar, a phone-addicted agent that fails to notice that his new client Liz Lemon has deliberately lit herself on fire.
Dean Hagopian was given the direction to play his medical examiner character by imitating Columbo. After a few days of shooting, it became obvious to co-director John Fasano that Hagopian had never even seen Columbo.
I'd stake my semi-professional reputation on it.
Hagopian had better success with impressions by imitating Paul Lynde for the role of Big Cheese in Samurai Pizza Cats.
The actors keep their underwear on for Zombie Nightmare's hot tub scene because actor Manon Turbide lied about her age, claiming to be 18 to snag the role of Susie when she was only 15. The producers kept Turbide, but dropped the planned full frontal nudity from the scene for obvious reasons.
Frank Dietz, best known as Frank, the cop, not TV's Frank, is also a filmmaker, co-directing Beast Wishes, a documentary about B-movie collector Bob Burns and his wife, Kathy. Burns has been a monster movie fan for so long that he became acquainted with Coleman Francis and even attended a test screening for The Beast of Yucca Flats.
Credited director Jack Bradman got his start in the adult film industry before segueing into the legitimacy that French-Canadian horror can bring to one's resume.
TV's Frank's Voodoo chant goes,
Shazam! Babaloo! Viacom! QVC!
Shazam is the secret word that allows Billy Batson to transform into Captain Marvel. Babaloo is the oft-quoted song that Ricky Ricardo used as a term of endearment for his wife on I Love Lucy. Viacom is the media conglomerate that owns Paramount, BET, 20th Century Fox, and more. And lastly, QVC is the name of a still active home shopping network.
Tom Servo's head accidentally falls off in the opening segment, but the crew rolls with it. In the Amazing Colossal episode guide, Kevin Murphy explains that Servo's head fell off a lot, but they have 24 or more heads stocked up, so let them fall.
Presented with the voodoo priestess's accent, Crow remarks,
She must be from Newfoundland.
That's pronounced Newfoundland, as in new F''N land. I suppose now we're even for pronouncing Trace's last name as Baloo in the first episode of It's Just a Show.
When Sean Levy, who plays Jim Batten, goes on a scenic drive, Crow blurts out,
It's the kids in the hall.
which is a nod to the sketch comedy's season 1 opening credits, which featured loving shots of the Mississauga suburbs.
Crow abandons the Batman sketch in segment 4 to work on his Mantis script. Mantis was a promising superhero pilot with a largely black cast, developed by Sam Raimi. When Mantis went to series, it was heavily retooled by the Fox network, and the supporting cast was whitewashed. The crew were so disheartened that the final episode had its titular hero committing suicide to defeat an invisible dinosaur.
During the scuffle at the police station, Servo quips,
Auditions for the band Fear.
Fear was a punk band who were famously banned from SNL when they were the musical guest on a 1981 episode hosted by the original punk himself, you guessed it, Donald Pleasance.
And the clock is ticking, but that's time! All right, so this movie is pretty heavy on voodoo, which is something that I know mostly from the movies, and I thought I would get better acquainted when I went to New Orleans last year. But as it turns out, my experience was that voodoo is mainly tourist trap stuff, and it was like eerily familiar to me as a Newfoundlander because gree-gree bags are the New Orleans equivalent of I got George faced on street shirts.
Haha.
Those are everywhere. I did not make that up, but I would not dare make that up. But yeah, there's just kind of like tourist paraphernalia. So I don't know anything about like the seriousness and the kind of cool aspects and historical and cultural value of voodoo, aside from the fact that it provided me with many an episode of Tales from the Crypt. Beth, you went on a bit of a voodoo hunt, didn't you? To find out more about the many, many faces of voodoo.
Indeed, and I should preface that is one of the things that is not so good about this, the way that Mike and the bots treat Haiti and Jamaica as if they're the same place. Molly McKemmy is Haitian. She is not Jamaican. They have completely different histories and were colonized by completely different people. Yes, they both had some African slave colony situations, but completely different. And it's the history of that African slavery that feeds into the creation of voodoo, which is a new world religion. And it is what they call kind of a syncretism when two religions kind of come together. So you have all these West Africans being brought by the French into Haiti as slave labor, and their religious beliefs and their language and everything else about their lives were completely suppressed. And the way that they were able to retain it is they kind of blended it with Roman Catholicism, which is a surprisingly easy fit because even though Catholicism, and I can say this as a Catholic, even though it's ostensibly like one God religion, it's monotheistic, you have this whole saint thing going on. So you have kind of like a pantheon of lesser gods. And voodoo has the same thing, that there's like this big god who's the creator, but he doesn't care about life on Earth. So if you really want to get anything done, you have to use your intercessors, Loa. And that's who you can pray to or do ceremonies to in order to get what you need in the world. But it is basically just an overlap of Western African Voodoo, I think it is called, with Roman Catholicism. And we should also say Haitian voodoo is very different from Louisiana voodoo. And they're even spelled differently to kind of discern between the two of them. So Haitian voodoo ends with a OU instead of two O's.
Oh.
Yeah, indeed. So one of the really cool things about voodoo is that it has been pretty gender neutral. So they've always had female priests, which this movie kind of gestures to. There's a lot of gender parity in terms of what you can do, and they're called mambos. And it's kind of the same thing as saints in Catholicism, or even with like Roman gods or anything like that, is that, if you follow the taboos of a particular god, they will aid you. And this had real importance for Haiti because, of course, Haiti is one of the places on Earth where the slaves were able to foment a revolution and kick out their oppressors. And through oral history, there's a claim that it was that they had this gigantic secret voodoo ceremony before they went out and went after the French, where basically they asked for the help of the pantheon of their gods. And it was that triggering moment that allowed them to create their revolution. So, I mean, it is a very interesting religion, and if people want to learn more about it, Wade Davis's The Serpent and the Rainbow.
Whoa.
Do you know about it?
Yes, that's a cool book, but it got turned into a very fun movie, directed and written by Wes Craven and starring Bill Pullman.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah. He gets subjected to a voodoo curse in which a nail gets put through his dick. But for revenge, he goes up to the voodoo guy at the end of the movie and uses zombie magic powers to put a nail in his dick. That's actually the climax of the movie.
So, long story short, like the bones in the nose and the grass skirts, that is some racist nonsense. That is not what voodoo looks like. There are trance states, and there are altars, and like just these really interesting conflations between the two religions. But what is most interesting is that apparently zombies are a thing. Mm-hmm. Zombies come directly from voodoo, but it's not that you can make dead people alive again, but that you can give them a poison that basically makes them seem like they're dead and puts them in kind of a trance-like state where they will just take orders from whoever is controlling them. So that your zombie is a live person who has been kind of zonked out. The veracity of this is still under debate, but a lot of anthropologists claim they've seen it happen, whether it's that this actually exists or it's just like a cultural belief, the idea that if you believe this happens, it will happen to you. It's hard to say, but this is certainly where the idea of the zombie comes from. But we also have black magic in the guise of Mr. Adam West, the very first Batman.
We, of course, have paid homage to Adam West when he sadly passed when we started this podcast, and there's a little bit of a tribute to him in Minisode 7B. But I'm curious, watching this movie, what did you think, Beth, of Adam West's performance?
Well, I'll be charitable and say nobody's a very good actor in this movie, but he's not a very good actor in this movie.
With Adam West, there's a great episode of Gilbert Gottfried's Amazing Colossal podcast that West did. And if you have not heard that podcast and you have like any interest in like old-timey showbiz of any kind, like Adam West is interviewed, Dick Cavett is like, I think, Gilbert Gottfried's first guest. God. Like he gets everyone who is still alive that was part of Hollywood when Gilbert Gottfried was younger and getting interested. And in fact, that's the time that he's most interested in when it comes to like what it was like to make movies and TV shows in LA. So he has West as a guest, and West is just brimming with great anecdotes and his usual goofiness.
Right.
And the highlight is the very brief mention of Zombie Nightmare early in that interview.
Oh, perfect.
where Wes says it's like, because of course Gilbert Gottfried is trying to make it sound like this was influential on The Walking Dead and Zombie Nightmare was ahead of his time. And Wes corrects him. It's like, no, John Michael Thor played a zombie. I played The Walking Dead. So he was pretty self-effacing about this. I don't know what it is about certain straight roles, like certain dramatic roles with Adam, where I think he's just being over-directed by people who are very self-conscious about his Batmanerisms. Because Adam West can act, and Adam West is like obviously at his best and most gifted as a kind of mock intense character that he played not just in Batman but on his like appearances in News Radio, The Simpsons, and Family Guy. Like, he is so great at playing someone who is both off kilter but entirely certain. And that's his like big comedic strength, and he is just brilliantly funny. And you always get the sense that, especially around this time when Batman hadn't really come back into the public consciousness, it was sort of seen as more of a 60s fad as far as the character being outside of comic books and cartoons.
You're talking about the 80s, not right now.
Yeah. That's the movie was made. Sorry. Zombie Nightmare was made, in 86, and it was before kind of Batman, Adam West's Batman kind of floored back into syndication and was starting to be reappreciated. Or I should say starting to be newly appreciated by like young kids, all sorts of young kids who didn't get a chance to grow up with him the first time and discovered just how like amazing that he was. And so, him being typecast caused a lot of problems. And so you get the sense that it's like, well, I can't be any trace of Adam West. And directors thinking there's no way we should have any kind of a bit of West's personality in his role. So a lot of times you're seeing him in these dramatic movies like Lady Chatterley 2 and which gets mentioned in this episode
numerous times.
Yep. And Zombie Nightmare and The Last Precinct and all that stuff. And he's just so watered down because nobody wants to mention Batman. No one wants to evoke Batman. And it seems like kind of a shame because it's like, as I said on that minisode, it's like, you know what? Batman is not cool on his own. Batman is cool because Adam West played him, and Adam West is cool. That is a stone cold fact. But Adam West had a real sense of humor about himself. And I think a great way to showcase that is something that John Michael Thor found when he tried to look up Adam West.
Do tell.
I'm actually going to send it to you because I want you to see this. All right, Beth. So John Michael Thor would meet Adam West at conventions. Like, they always got along. Adam West is the nicest guy. And Thor thought, maybe if they're in the same town, he could look him up and hang out with Adam West for a few days. So he went to look up Adam West and found exactly what I have sent you, that people are only now starting to discover after West just recently passed away.
Oh my God. All right, I'm going to try to explain what I'm seeing. Okay, it's from an old-timey phone book. West, Adam. C, Wayne Bruce. Parentheses, millionaire. All right, Wayne Bruce, millionaire. Please consult crime fighters in the yellow pages. Okay, crime fighters. See Batman, white pages. Batman, see West Adam.
Adam West had an elaborate goof in both the white and yellow pages. You know what? There's tons of great things that you can still see Adam West in to appreciate him. Again, some great recommendations were ones that I dropped in the minisode and also put up on the Twitter account back when Adam West passed. But it's also worth checking out. There's a really fun comedy drama called The New Age, in which he plays like the kind of chauvinistic, wandering-eyed dad of Peter Weller, which means that Batman played RoboCop's dad in a movie.
I never even thought about that. I gotta say, though, even though he's not a good actor in this, he still has like real presence. He's got a natural charisma, and I think probably he has the most charisma of anyone else in this movie. Except maybe John Michael Thor. All All right, I think that's probably enough about Zombie Nightmare for the time being. Chris, do we have any random questions?
We sure do. Paul from Labrador writes, Happy Spoopsyween! Adam, I've given you my $1. When am I going to get to see Scary Eye Town?
Okay, first of all, Paul, I remember who this is. You wrote in earlier, and as I told you then, there is nothing good inside of you, and nothing good will grow from you. However, I do appreciate the $1. Now, we do have some updates. I've been hard at work getting the production of Scary Eye Town off the ground. I've prepared this live audio trailer for my castmates. Now, I wanted to get Barbara Crampton for the lead, but no actor comes to Canada for less than 25,000 Canadian dollars. So, Beth, you will play the part of charlatan psychic Barbara Crampton. It's the part you were born to play, unless Patricia Arquette gets back to me. Now, Chris, I've given you the coveted role of Various, and I will act as narrator. Let us begin. From the writer of An American Werewolf in London, Ontario, comes Scary Eye Town, a story of a woman with second sight, pursued by all-seeing eyeball monsters. Let's listen.
Oh, you're the girl who has visions, eh? Well, I bet you didn't see this coming.
Ah!
Perfect. Made in Toronto, where life is cheap, Scary Eye Town boasts a script so torturous it's been tried and convicted for war crimes.
I'm a cat. I jumped out of a garbage can and my tail is covered in eyes.
Ah!
Plus, it's got a plum roll for a woman aged 30 or more.
Excuse me, miss. Is there something in my eye?
Scary Eye Town, see it before it sees you. In hell, where no one can hear you scream for ice cream. Rated R.
I think that really played to my strengths.
I think it did.
If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you want to do that voodoo that you do so well, or if you'd like to ask Beth and Adam anything, get in touch with us. Our website is itsjustashow.com, or we're on Twitter at itisjustashow. We'd love to hear from you. It's Just a Show is a podcast from Megaphonic FM. Find all our fancy little shows at megaphonic.fm. Thank you to all our Patreon supporters. You can support It's Just a Show and access some superfan bonus bits, including a special Halloween bonus bit by going to itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And if you want to follow up on anything that was mentioned today on It's Just a Show, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/16.
Now that we've escaped the horrors of Halloween, I guess the scary times are all over and we have something fun and pleasant to look forward to. So, Chris, what is the doubtlessly fun and pleasant and nice and enjoyable episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000 that we have to look forward to in 2 weeks?
Well, the scary times are not quite over yet, because by the time we put out our next episode, Beth will have defended her PhD in English. So to celebrate, we'll be watching the second best script they ever did, after this one, Season 10, Episode 9, Hamlet!
As if I wasn't already regretting my life choice.
Now, Beth, just so you know, this is an episode that even fans of the sci-fi era don't like.
Yeah, I know it by reputation. I've never seen it. I'm sorry, everyone.
Oh, my God.
Oh, Adam, you've seen this episode, haven't you?
You know what? You're talking about me as if that part of me was still alive.
I will say, Beth, you have no idea how bad this episode is.
Let's not do KTMA, she says. Look at us now!
Well, I guess we've had a good run of pretty enjoyable episodes, so it's about time we did a stinker.
Stay tuned in 2 weeks for the last episode of It's Just a Show.
All right, well, let's do it. Let's get our bird on.
Okay, let's. But until then...
See you next crime.
Yes, and get in front of your TV sets for the Horror-thon, and be sure to put on your special mask. It's Halloween!
Take it away, Theme Squad.
We will find it.